Heading into this past weekend, there were some major fight announcements by the boss man, Dana White, and we are going to touch on those right here, right now. There's 5 of them spanning multiple events from the late summer into the early to mid-fall. There is a lot to unpack here with a plethora of ranked matchups and some big-time implications in numerous of these bouts. And the first one starts at Noche UFC in just a few weeks' time on September 13th in San Antonio, Texas. And that will be between the veteran and number 9 ranked bantamweight in the world, Rob Font, taking on one of the youngest fighters on the UFC roster today, Raul Rosas Jr., the biggest opportunity and chance of his career so far. Although Rob Font is 38 years old entering this fight at Noche UFC against Raul Rosas Jr., he will enter also on a 2-fight win streak, and both of those are decision wins over young up-and-coming talents such as Kyler Phillips and Jean Matsumoto. The most recent bout for Font was that matchup against Matsumoto in Seattle back in February, the short-notice replacement Matsumoto, who was undefeated prior to heading into that bout, and Rob Font spoiled and ruined his perfect undefeated record. The biggest problem for Rob Font's career has been when he gets those big opportunities against the toughest competition and the biggest names, that is where he tends to falter. See the fights with Jose Aldo, Marlon Chito Vera, Corey Sandhagen, and Deiveson Figueiredo. He was in every single one of those bouts and being competitive, but could not do enough to get the job done over the course of the decisions with each of them. But he also holds victories over Sergio Pettis, Ricky Simón, Marlon Moraes, and Cody Garbrandt. He has fought the who's who of this 135-pound weight class for many, many years at this point, and although he may be closer to the end of his career than he is the beginning, this is still a massive opportunity for Rob Font to hold his spot in the top 10, to prove that he is still an elite-level bantamweight, and to spoil all of the momentum that Raul Rosas Jr. has spent the last couple of years building. The 20-year-old El Nino, Raul Rosas Jr., is 11-1 in his professional career already, with 8 of those 11 victories by way of stoppage, and he will enter this fight at Noche UFC on a 4-fight win streak. But none of the names on his UFC resume so far come close to Rob Font and all that he has accomplished throughout his time in the UFC. His most recent victory was against Vince Morales back in March. Prior to that, another decision over Arichi Lang at Noche UFC for 2024. And then he had 2 back-to-back finishes over Ricky Tercios and Terrence Mitchell. And those 2 finish victories would come after his first professional loss, where C-Rod, Christian Rodriguez, would play spoiler and hand Raul the first loss of his career in April of 2023 at UFC 287. And I think it's safe to say that in the 6 UFC fights that Raul has had, Christian Rodriguez is definitely the biggest name and the hardest competition, and that is the fight where he faltered. Will we now see history repeat itself come September against the ranked Rob Font? And if not, that means that Raul Rosas Jr. at 20 years old will not only be a ranked bantamweight, but he will be a top 10 ranked bantamweight and potentially well on his way to breaking John Jones' long-standing youngest champion in UFC history record. Next up is a very fun addition to the UFC 320 card on October 4th in Las Vegas, where we will see 2 top 15 featherweights go at it. It will be the former interim title challenger Josh Emmett and the surging Youssef Zalal. The 40-year-old Josh Emmett will be making his second walk to the octagon in October, as his first fight did not go his way. It was a loss back in April to Lerone Murphy, who we just learned last weekend is now a number 1 contender for Alexander Volkanovski's throne after knocking Aaron Pico's head into the 3rd row of the bleachers. And as a matter of fact, Josh Emmett will enter this fight with Youssef Zalal, having lost 3 of his last 4 bouts, with the lone victory coming against Bryce Mitchell at the end of 2023 at UFC 296, where he had maybe one of the most brutal featherweight knockouts that UFC has ever seen. And to be fair, the other 2 losses during this stretch were to Ilia Topuria, he would go on to become the featherweight king, and Yair Rodriguez, a former interim champion. That was the interim championship fight, as a matter of fact, back in February of 2023. But we can't forget about the period between March of 2019 and June of 2022, where Josh Emmett found himself on a 5-fight win streak in order to earn that interim title fight opportunity. Now can he turn the clock back one more time to halt the momentum of the surging Zalal before it's too late in his career? The number 9 ranked Zalal, who is 1 spot behind Josh Emmett, who is number 8 in the featherweight rankings, will enter this fight on a 7-fight win streak and is 4-0 since rejoining the promotion in March of 2024. The first 3 fights back in the UFC were all finishes over Billy Quarantillo, Jarno Aarons, and Jack Shore, and then he got a victory over Calvin Kattar in February via decision. And the Moroccan Devil is still just 28 years young, so it will be 12 years younger than his opponent Josh Emmett on this night, and if he can beat Emmett, a former title challenger, he will be be right in the mix of this featherweight division that is at a very important time. There's a lot of moving pieces. Volkanovski is a two-time champion. Lerone Murphy is next up. Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway are both no longer a part of this division. A big win from Zalal here, or Josh Emmett for that matter, can catapult them to where they could just be one win away from challenging for the belt. On October 11th, in the UFC's return to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, the co-main event will feature the former flyweight king turned to number 6 ranked bantamweight Deiveson Figueiredo taking on the 15th ranked, supremely underrated Montel Jackson. The 37-year-old Figueiredo is 3-2 since making the move up from flyweight to bantamweight, and that started against Rob Font in December of 2023. Then he would defeat Cody Garbrandt and Marlon Chito Vera, but now finds himself having lost his last 2 bouts, but it's to Petr Yan, former champion and maybe soon-to-be champion again, and Corey Sandhagen most recently at UFC Iowa in May, where he would lose via second-round TKO, and now Corey Sandhagen will find himself 1 week prior to this challenging Merab Dvalishvili for the bantamweight title. So this very well could be the last big hoorah for Deiveson Figueiredo to hold his place amongst the elite contenders of the bantamweight division, because now at 37, if he loses to someone way back in the rankings at number 15 as Montel Jackson, who also does not have near the name value as someone like Figueiredo does, that will send him way down the totem pole, so far in fact that I don't believe a title fight could ever be in his future cards again. And the 33-year-old Montel Jackson, who is a newly ranked bantamweight, is 15-2 overall and will enter his biggest opportunity to date, riding a 6-fight win streak. His last loss came in July of 2020, and that was to Brett Johns, someone who is no longer in the UFC, and he hasn't looked back since, and his win in this year came on the very same night as Deiveson Figueiredo lost, and that was May 3rd in Des Moines, Iowa, where he would earn a decision over Daniel Marcos, who was undefeated heading into that fight. And he also has 3 first-round finishes over the course of this 6-fight win streak, and 2 of them were against Damon Blackshear and Ronnie Yahya. So it's undeniable that if Montel Jackson can get this win against Deiveson Figueiredo, which is no certainty, and it is absolutely a massive jump in competition, he will no longer be this underrated guy that a lot of people haven't heard of. He will instead be a bantamweight title contender on the heels of a potential title shot should he win one more after this one. And lastly, we have 2 huge additions to the UFC Vancouver card 1 week after Rio de Janeiro, Brazil on October 18th at the Rogers Arena in Canada. We have a potential number 1 contender fight in the main event between the number 5 ranked Reinier de Ridder and the 6th ranked Anthony Hernandez. And Kevin Holland is back for his 5th fight of the year taking on Mike Malott. Reinier de Ridder and Anthony Hernandez and the entire rest of the middleweight division right now is very fresh of mind with the title fight just happening, with September 6th's main event between Caio Borralho and Nasruddin Imavov quickly approaching, and now this one between Reinier de Ridder and Anthony Hernandez. For RDR, he is 4-0 already in the UFC, and he just debuted in November of last year. And now de Ridder will be having his 5th UFC fight in 11 months, and should he beat Anthony Hernandez, may just be next up for Khamzat Chimaev's new throne. And he put himself in this opportunity by getting a decision win over the former champion Robert Whittaker over the course of a 25-minute decision in their main event in Abu Dhabi at the end of July. And for the 15-2, 31-year-old fluffy Anthony Hernandez, he is on an insane win streak right now. As a matter of fact, he now holds the longest win streak in the middleweight division because Dricus du Plessis was just dethroned. And that is an 8-fight win streak, and it was capped off just a couple of weeks ago against Roman Dolidze, where he would absolutely bully Dolidze up until finishing him with a 4th-round submission. And out of those 4 names, Caio Borralho, Nasruddin Imavov, Reinier de Ridder, and Anthony Hernandez, after what Fluffy just did against Dolidze, paired with all of the momentum he has over the last 4 years, he may be the favorite to potentially give Khamzat Chimaev his toughest test to date, and maybe even hand him the first loss of his career. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, because Anthony has to stop RDR's undefeated streak in the UFC first. And we have Kevin Holland, who's the 15th ranked welterweight in the world, back in action again now for the 5th time, as previously mentioned, in this calendar year, and he is taking on Canada's own Mike Malott in a big-time featured bout. Kevin Holland started 2025 with a loss to Reinier de Ridder, the aforementioned middleweight contender, then would have 2 back-to-back wins over Gunnar Nelson and Vicente Luque, and then lose his most recent bout in July at UFC 318 to Daniel Rodriguez in one of the wildest fights of the year so far. So now he will look to get above 500 in the year 2025, but in order to do so, he will have to take out a dangerous Mike Malott, who has got his swagger back since suffering that upset loss to Neil Magny at the beginning of last year. And that is because he has won 2 fights since, with a decision over Trevin Giles and a second-round knockout over Charles Radke. All in all, the 33-year-old is 12-2-1, and he has finished 11 of those 12 victories. He is one of still the biggest prospects out of Canada current day, and if he beats Kevin Holland, he will finally get a number next to his name. So I want to get your thoughts on these massive fight announcements down in the comments below, and give me your early predictions as well, and let me know what your favorite of these 5 announcements is too. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new, because I am always giving my thoughts and opinions on fight announcements such as these. And heading into each card, I break down and preview the biggest and best fights and storylines, and in the aftermath, I recap the most meaningful results. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where podcast episodes release there every Monday and Friday. Have a great week, and I will see you all in the next video.